Hey everybody, it's Katie. Today I want to talk about childbirth. It's definitely natural to worry about what that's going to look like. Is it going to hurt? Am I going to die? No, you won't. Popular culture tells us that it's going to be horrible and miserable, and actually, for those of you that are familiar with the Old Testament, it even tells you it's going to be painful. But I'm here to tell you that the New Testament says differently. I had 2 babies, both supernatural, pain-free childbirths, and I want to tell you what I did in hopes that it can help you contend for yours. My story starts with the excitement of being pregnant for the first time with our first daughter, and then it quickly moved into, oh crap, concern, a little bit of fear, if we're going to be perfectly honest, because, we've all seen babies, and we all know where they typically come out of, and that's kind of scary. So, yeah, went from being super excited to being fearful. And I didn't want that, but I didn't really know what to do with it. A good friend of mine suggested an amazing book, and it is this right here, Supernatural Childbirth, which we'll talk about here in just a few moments. She suggested this book, and I read through it. It was like the light bulb came on for me. It completely changed everything. I birthed both of our daughters, both of our sweet little girls, without pain, and actually relatively short amount of time. Our second daughter actually surprised us and came really fast and was born on our bathroom floor. If you're interested in watching that video and us talking about how that happened, you can click on the link here and you'll see that story. So I want to get back to the book. This is kind of what started it all. This is Supernatural Childbirth by Jackie Mize, and once I read this book, it completely shifted my line of thinking, and that's when the changes started to happen. I got the book early on in my pregnancy, and I read it. How can this be? How have I not known about this? It was unlike anything I had ever read, but it made total sense. If you're interested in buying the book, we'll put a link in the description. It's on Amazon. It's not very expensive, and if this at all intrigues you, it's well worth the read. As we go through the video today, I want to share with you kind of the 3 stages that I felt like I went through and that were helpful for me as we went through this whole process in leading up to both of the supernatural childbirths that I experienced. One of them is, and the first, is to understand it. What are we even talking about? The second is prepare for it. And the third one is live it. As I mentioned earlier, it's pretty much impossible to find anything in our movies and TV and social media and all the things that we're watching and looking at out there. It's almost impossible to find any sort of positivity surrounding the actual part of childbirth, the actual baby being born. The only thing that you hear is how awful it was, how hurt it was, how long it took, and just all the things that we all think are supposed to come along with childbirth, and that there's no other options. For those of you that are familiar with the Bible, it talks in the Old Testament, it actually talks about it being uncomfortable and painful for childbirth. Maybe as a woman, it's just one of those things where you hear it and you're like, oh no. But I was certainly familiar with that part about childbirth being painful, and he will greatly multiply your sorrow and all that, and I'm thinking, well, this doesn't sound very good. But after reading this book, I've come to the understanding that Old Testament is Old Covenant, New Testament is New Covenant, and Jesus, but Jesus. So we have that. We're no longer subject to the old law, and we can do things like ask for a pain-free childbirth and for him to come into the room and surround us and give us strength and help us partner with him throughout the whole labor process and the pushing process and everything. Under the category of understanding what's going on, I would definitely suggest to buy the book because it's got a lot of really great information. The woman who wrote it has had multiple supernatural childbirths. And also at the end, which is one thing that I found really great, there are oodles of prayers and scripture references, because it's one thing for someone to say it, but it's another thing for it to be backed up. She's saying, this is possible, and here's the proof. Go to your Bible and read this. And it's like, okay, I can do that, and I trust the Bible. So it's almost like there's these little guides that kind of help you work through the Bible where you see these things that say, okay, yeah, and it just builds your encouragement and your momentum, because all throughout the Bible it's talking about how we have the authority to ask for such things. The next stage is to prepare for it. Now, for those of you who have had babies, or those of you who are currently pregnant, you're obviously preparing. You have probably been looking into, what do I need to buy for the baby? What kind of diapers? What kind of everything? What do I get? What kind of crib? There's all these questions. How do I prepare to be the best mom I can be and have the best life for my little tiny baby? And you do all this preparation. Well, it's also equally as important, if not more important, to also emotionally and spiritually prepare yourself. What I mean by preparing emotionally and spiritually is pray about it. Talk to the Lord about it. Share your fears and concerns and just partner with Him in this. And I would also suggest, this was extremely helpful for me, I would also suggest bringing in people that you know will absolutely 100% partner with you and not kind of look at you from like, what is she talking about? Someone who you know and then you can trust will be with you, will support you, will encourage you. For me, that was my husband and my parents. And actually I also told my best friend about it, and she was a great encouragement, because when I was pregnant with my first, she was having her last, which was her 5th child. And I told her about it, and I remember actually exactly where I was. I was sitting outside the courthouse, and I told her about it, and I was kind of thinking, I wonder what she's going to say. And she was like, yeah, actually, yeah, you're right. And I was like, yes. So I had a very small little group of people that I knew were with me. They were going to pray for me. They were going to encourage me. And that was huge, because when you're pregnant, it's not something that you want to do alone. And so even if there's just one person, find someone who will pray with you and be an encouragement to you during this process. Another suggestion that I have as far as preparing is, don't spend a whole lot of time around people who are negative Nellies. There's always going to be those women who want to share with you the story of their 472-hour labor, and that there was all this horrific stuff, and that it was the most painful thing that they've ever done in their entire lives, and you'll never make it without the pain medicine. Stay away from that. Now, I understand that there's going to be circumstances where you might not have a choice but to have, if someone's talking to you and sharing. One of the things that I got into the habit of doing is, when people started talking about their birth story, if it was starting to take a turn for the worse, I started to say, whoa, I don't mean to be rude, but this is my first baby, and I don't want to hear about bad stories. And there were a few people that were kind of tiffy, but most of them just laughed and kind of, well, you'll see. And I'm thinking, okay, yeah, I will. I will see. I would rather not invite that kind of energy, if you will. I would rather not invite that into my brain, because when you're pregnant and you're hormonal and so I just started to stay away from that. And I also knew if there were negative people after listening to a horrible birth story, I would make a point to just pray about it, or I would read my book, or I would just get my focus back on the goal and not on the negativity. It's important to recognize, and I do want to mention this, it's very important to recognize that every birth is going to be different, and there will be things that could potentially be out of your control. And I had no idea what was going to happen. For my first daughter, my plan was to labor at home and then go and have my baby at a birth center. But I also realized that there was the potential that something could happen. I don't know. I could end up at the hospital. I could end up needing a C-section. There was all these possibilities, but what I chose to focus on was what I wanted and what I was praying into, which was a pain-free, natural childbirth with no drugs at the birth center in the water. And that's what I prayed for. I had a birth plan set up for other things that might happen, but I focused on what I was contending for with the Lord. So it's important to recognize that, but the way I look at it is I would way rather go into labor and approaching birthing a child just so calm and in anticipation of what the Lord was going to do, and just trusting him. And then if it went differently, that's okay. But I would way rather walk into it partnering with him than scared out of my brain. Another thing that I did as far as preparing is I attended birth classes. I found an instructor who was kind of more like-minded, someone who I agreed with as far as their philosophy and birthing and all that. And I found an instructor, and my husband and I did a 12-week birth class. And it was amazing. I'm really, really glad I did it. Nothing is going to prepare you perfectly for birthing a child. But the more you know, knowledge squashes fear. Because the more you know, the more you're like, okay, I think I remember this. Okay, I've done this. It's okay. I remember this. I remember this part. Or just knowing what your body is capable of doing is a huge help. God created us amazingly, and we were created to do this. We can do it. So just knowing that was a huge help. The third stage is live it. So when you feel like it's coming, or when you wake up in the morning or in the afternoon or in the evening and you start to feel those contractions and you're like, oh, those aren't Braxton Hicks contractions, that's when you start to focus and you start to remember what did you read, and you start to remember the promises that the Lord gave you and the trust that you have in him, and stay in contact with God. Be prayerful about it. Find that one person or the two people or whoever it is that you've brought into this small circle of trust, and have them with you and speak encouragement over you and remind you of your goal and that you can do it and that you want to do this. Because when you get to that stage, it's this mix of excitement and like, oh my gosh, and fear oftentimes, because again, okay, here comes labor, here comes the screaming. Remember what you've been contending for these 9 months, and remember what you've prayed into, and have the people around you that are going to speak goodness and peace into this process. As I've mentioned, I have had 2 supernatural childbirths. The second daughter I mentioned a little bit earlier, and there was a view card up here. And the first daughter, if you're interested in watching that story, we've got that right here if you want to watch that. And I would encourage you, do watch them. I know for me, the more I read about this and the more I heard about it and watched it, the more encouraged I got and the more momentum I felt like I had. And just, it was such a breath of fresh air to hear the positivity versus the same old, what you're going to see on TV or hear about, in the news or whatever. So I would encourage you to watch the videos and find other sources of encouragement. So I hope that you liked the video today. Thank you so much for watching. If you like the video, please click like. And if there's anybody in your life that you think could benefit from hearing about this, I would encourage you to share it with them. I think that would be great. My goal is that we start to look at birth in a completely different light. So yeah, we would love for you to share the video if you have someone that would be interested in it. We have a Facebook page and we have a blog where we talk about a lot of these videos that we share. So we would love for you to check us out in one of those areas. We would also like to invite you to be a subscriber. We do videos every week, and we've got over 70 videos of just family, baby stuff, supernatural childbirth, budgeting, all kinds of stuff. So thank you again for watching. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see you again next week for our next video. Bye.